Hey everyone, in this video lecture, we are going to be learning about the topic of complex inheritance, which means we are not dealing with simple Mendelian traits anymore. We've talked about Gregor Mendel and his work studying the pea plants. The problem with the work of Gregor Mendel is that he was studying what we would call either-or traits in these pea plants. So for example, for flower color, it was either purple or white. The plants wouldn't be any other color. They would be tall or short, green or yellow, round or wrinkled, and so on. And the question is this really realistic for human traits? Are we only one version of a trait or the other? And realistically, that is not what we see in human traits. They're much more complex than that. So trait like height, we would say, is non-Mendelian. So looking at this little infographic here of the height of the individuals in the Harry Potter movies, we see that it's not just tall or short. It's more of a spectrum. There's a wide variety of different traits that you can show for height. You're not just tall, you're not just short. So we need to look at some of these other examples and how we can get traits that are not just these either-or traits. Another example would be eye color. We are not just brown-eyed or blue-eyed. There's a spectrum of color for eyes where some people, like myself, are more of a blue-green color. Some might look more green or brown with hints of green and so on. So we need to figure out what's going on and what kind of inheritance patterns are we looking at if it's not just one or the other. Another example is with flowers. We can take a red flower and a white flower and their offspring come out pink. So we're not seeing the traditional, they're either going to be red or white flowers. We're actually getting a blend of these colors. So we know that in reality, most traits are not actually following Mendel's conclusions. So that's why we need to look at all the different patterns of traits that are more complex than that. So there are 4 sorts of inheritance patterns that we understand that are more complex than Mendel's traits. So we're going to go through each of these and look at some examples and how they display more complex inheritance compared to Gregor Mendel's inheritance patterns. So the first is incomplete dominance. And by the name, it's exactly what it sounds. None of the traits in this particular example are dominant. It's incomplete. So neither allele will be dominant over the other. And when you get the heterozygous genotype, where we typically would see one dominant allele, one recessive allele, you're going to end up with a blend of the 2 alleles because neither is dominant over the other. Because neither allele is dominant, there's a few different ways we can use the notation for genotype here. So we can stick to the typical use uppercase letters for one allele, lowercase letters for the other. So in this case, red is big R, white, you need little r. Again, neither allele is really dominant over the other. So when you get a heterozygous genotype, big R, little r, in this case, you're not getting red. You're getting a blend of the 2 colors of pink. The other way we could see the notation show up, because again, neither allele is dominant, we could just use all uppercase letters, but use different letters for each color. So red, we can stick with RR. White, we could do WW. So if you have an offspring that is RW, you're going to get a blend of the 2 colors, red and white, to make pink. So you can see the notation done either way. Sometimes the all uppercase with the 2 different letters might be a better option, so you don't accidentally see big R, little r, and just think red, knowing that this is an incomplete dominant problem. So to go through an example with this of a Punnett square, so if we have 2 heterozygous parents, so big R, little r being crossed with a little big R, little r, both parents are pink. So we want to predict what are their offspring going to look like if both parents are pink. So we can set up this simple Punnett square and we fill in with the genotypes and phenotypes. So if we have big R combining, we'd have an offspring that is big R, the flower would be red. In this box, we'd have big R combining with little r, so that would make a pink flower. This one would also be big R, little r, creating a pink flower. And then in this last box, we have little r, creating a white flower. In terms of our percentages, 25% of the flowers, there's a 25% chance that when these 2 flowers mate, their offspring would be red. There's a 50% chance they would get a pink offspring and a 25% chance that they would create white offspring. So this is typical what we see of flowers with the incomplete dominance and how we can get that blending of two alleles to create a new offspring. The next type of complex inheritance pattern is codominance. So in this case, both alleles are actually dominant. So in this case, when you have the heterozygous genotype, both alleles are going to show up because neither allele is dominant over the other. So here's an example in cattle. So you can have a pure red cattle or cow that is big R, big R. The white phenotype here is W, big W, big W. So here we're definitely going to use two different letters because they're both dominant. So we want to use uppercase letters, but we can't use R because we need to indicate we have a different trait or a different allele. The offspring that when you have the heterozygous genotype, big R, big W, you are going to see both white and red kind of spots showing up. So you see that color, different color pattern. So let's do an example of this where we cross a big R, so pure red cow with a big R, big W. So that would be this Rowan phenotype where both alleles show up. So if we cross big R here, we get an offspring that's big R showing the red phenotype. Same thing here, red. But down here we have big R combining with big W. So that gives you the Rowan as well as this one. So our percentages would be 50% is the pure red, there's 0% pure white, and 50% are Rowan. Then the next type of complex inheritance pattern is looking at multiple alleles. So not only what's typical is we see two different alleles. So red and white, purple and white, or tall and short. In this case, we're talking about more than two alleles. And an example of this in real life are blood types. So in this case, we have 3 unique alleles. And because we have 3 alleles, we can't just use an uppercase letter and lowercase letter anymore. We typically will see with multiple allele problems, you have a letter with an exponent to represent the different alleles. So in this case, we have 2 dominant alleles. So this also throws in codominance as well. And then a recessive allele. So there are 2 different dominant alleles. There's an A dominant allele and a B dominant allele for blood type, and then the single I recessive allele. And the I stands for a word that has Latin roots that represents something related to blood. So that's where this I comes in. The A and the B represent on your blood cells different antigens, or kind of like little signals or receptors on the outside of your blood cells. And so if you have the A allele on the outside of your blood cell, there'll be A antigens. If you have the B allele, you have the B antigen. And if you have the recessive allele, that would represent no antigens on the outside of your blood cell. And so for the different blood types, there's A blood, B blood, AB blood, and type O blood. So the genotype associated with each of these is, in order to have type A blood, where you only have the A antigen on the outside of your blood cell, you can either be homozygous for the A allele, or you can be heterozygous where you have the A allele plus the recessive allele, because A is dominant over the recessive I. Similarly here for the type B blood, you see the B antigens on the outside of the blood cell. You can have the homozygous genotype with both big B alleles, or you can have the heterozygous where you have the B allele with the recessive I allele, because B is dominant over I, the little I. In order to have AB blood, you're looking at codominance. You have both the A and B alleles, so you show both A and B antigens on your blood cell. And then lastly, type O blood, you have the only way to get it is 2 recessive I alleles, and there are no antigens on the outside of your blood cell. So if you practice this, here's a little word problem about a blood type problem. So it says a person that is heterozygous for type A blood has a child with a person that is homozygous for type B blood. What are the possible blood types of the offspring? So first, we're going to fill in across the top the genotype for the parent that is heterozygous for type A blood. So type A blood is over here. To be heterozygous, you have 2 different alleles, so that must mean they have the I with the exponent A. plus the recessive I allele. So we'll put that across the top. And then the second parent says homozygous for type B blood. So homozygous is the same allele. So that's the two exponent B alleles. So we'll put those down the side. And then it's just a matter of filling in our Punnett square. So we're going to combine the two alleles here. So we have IA, IB blood, same thing here. In this box, we have the IB allele with the recessive I, same thing down here. So now I can fill in what my phenotypes are. So this blood cell would have both A and B antigens on the outside of it. Same thing with this blood cell. This one would only have the B allele or B antigen on the outside of the cell. Same thing down here. So in terms of our percentages, there is no type A blood. So the phenotype would be what type of blood cell we have. There's no type A blood here. There is 50% chance their offspring would have type B blood, a 50% chance of having AB blood, and a 0% chance of having type O blood. So blood typing is typically of a multiple allele problems. Another one that's pretty common is looking at fur coat color in animals, but most likely you'd see this type of problem as a blood type problem. And then the last type of complex inheritance is called polygenic traits. So poly in Latin meaning many, genic referring to genes. So this is where we have traits where many genes are interacting to create one phenotype. So this is where we see those more spectrum traits like height, skin color, eye color. There are many different genes that are dictating what phenotype you're showing. So in eye color, for example, there's at least 3 genes, probably more that we know of, that relate to eye color. And this one in particular, the trait has 2 alleles, brown and blue. Brown's dominant over blue. The second gene, it's the same thing, brown and blue. The third gene, the 2 alleles are green and blue. And the order of dominance kind of always typically we see brown is dominant over green, green is dominant over blue, which means brown is definitely dominant over blue. So this might mean you have one gene giving you brown as your phenotype, one gene giving you blue as your phenotype, and then the other gene giving you blue as well, which gives you kind of a bluishy brown eye color. So you're blending all the different phenotypes together. So this is just a little summary slide kind of indicating the different types of complex inheritance and what you want to remember. So incomplete, remember that when it's heterozygous, you get that blended phenotype. Codominance, both alleles are dominant, so both phenotypes show up. This is typical in organisms with spots and stripes. If you have multiple alleles, there's more than just 2 alleles. There's more than just one dominant allele, one recessive allele. You're probably using a letter with an exponent. And then lastly, polygenic, we got many genes, which gives you those sort of spectrum traits.